What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, March 26, 2018, start of a brand new week of utter insanity, courtesy of those sphincters in Washington, D.C. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the calls, put you on the air with your questions and comments here. So let's just get right on into it. The big news right now is all of a sudden, they're escalating this anti-Russian hysteria, and President Trump is going to expel 60 Russian diplomats and close their consulate in the city of Seattle. And basically, that's supposedly because of pressure from the United Kingdom, who suffered this alleged and highly suspect Russian assassination plot on their own soil. Now, 14 European Union states have now said, me too, and there is this mass coordinated expulsion of Russian diplomats, supposedly over the Skripal case. And again, this is Iraq all over again. Oh, we think Iraq has got weapons of mass destruction. We must go nasty on them. And Ukraine is also coming on board. They're expelling 13 of their Russian diplomats. And this kind of behavior is usually a prelude to war, when you start kicking out each other's diplomats. Now, Russia is vowing an imminent response. This is coming from RIA Novosti, and basically protesting the EU and NATO nations who expel the envoys, and confirm Russia will respond to each country expelling diplomats, saying the expulsions will not go unanswered, and the unfriendly action won't be left unanswered. The most worrying quote in all of this is, the U.S. only understands force, which unfortunately does seem to be the case these days. But I'm very alarmed about talk of force. We just seem to be headed into this direction of a direct confrontation, and it seems like the only real reason our government is doing this is to basically get out of the economic mess they made. Okay, we're getting some issues on our Twitch connection. Oh, okay, we're back again. Now, Paul Craig Roberts is out there saying that Washington has declared hegemony or war. And that's something that we've been saying on this show for quite a long time, that basically the U.S. wants to rule the world, and if they can't rule it, they're going to make war on it. There we are. Now, but Paul Craig Roberts is absolutely right. The United States has lost the art of making a deal, which is rather amazing when you consider that a lot of people thought Donald Trump, with his art of the deal, was going to come on in and revive diplomacy. That's certainly how he campaigned. But instead, we're still on the path to what could very possibly be a bloody, bloody, ugly war. Now, getting on down to Syria, it looks like the Syrian army is about to get full control over eastern Ghouta, and the U.S.-backed militants are apparently continuing to accept this deal from the Syrian government to surrender their weapons, promise they won't offend again, take their families, and get the heck out. And so, as a result, the Russian military is warning that the U.S. is about to launch a major war in Syria against Damascus. They're saying it is in fact imminent. All that's missing is some propaganda device by which the government can get the American people to say, oh yes, let's go into Syria again. We've only been there, what, 7, 8 years? Yes, let's throw more of our money and more of our children into Syria. Now, they're not getting traction with all the talk about chemical weapons because we've been lied to so many times. So is it going to be a false flag military attack? And once they launch this war into Syria, is this going to lead to direct war with Russia and direct war with Iran? In all probability, yes. We know the U.S. government wants to invade Iran. They just need an excuse to do it. Well, Iran is fighting against us in Syria, therefore, blah, 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 blah. You know how this all works on out. But the Russian military are warning that, yeah, the U.S. is getting ready to launch a major, major attack. And apparently there's a lot of military operations on Diego Garcia. Strategic bombers are based there that can launch at least 100 cruise missiles and then use other high-precision munitions in a follow-up attack. On average, one bomber carries 20 AGM-86 ALCMs. 5 bombers are believed to be normally stationed on this island. That means that at least 500 cruise missiles can be fired on short notice. I hope they perform as poorly as the last batch that we sent into Syria, because most of those didn't hit their intended targets. Now, according to Syrian sources, Turkish air raids into the Kurdish regions are destroying Christian archaeological sites. And apparently the Turkish aircraft basically bombed antiquities such as Barad, 15 kilometers south of the city of Afrin. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Over in Israel, they've had a little bit of a whoopsie. Their Iron Dome system came online, started searching the skies for targets, and it turned out that it was mistaking gunfire in the Gaza Strip where they were training. Hamas was just training. You have to keep up proficiency of the troops, and that triggered Iron Dome to kick into action. It was just looking around, and everybody was saying, where are the missiles, where are the rockets? But apparently, no rockets and no mortars were ever actually fired. It was a false positive on that. Now, some of these anti-missile systems, you have to wonder how really effective they are, because apparently Riyadh came under ballistic missile attack from Yemen. The missiles were aimed at Riyadh's airport, and they fired off their Patriot missile interceptors. And 2 things were immediately apparent. In a couple of cases, the Patriots just turned around and came on back and struck targets near their original launchers. And the other thing that's noticed, there's a video of all of this stuff. Even when the Patriot intercepts the missile coming on in, it results in a huge mass of flaming wreckage coming down over an extended area. And if you really think about it, there may be a lot more damage from that than just letting the ballistic missile hit where it intended. See, I think most people probably have this kind of movie idea that when an interceptor intercepts an incoming ballistic missile, there's a little puff of harmless smoke and that's the end of it. Doesn't really work that way. We saw that also during the first Iraq War, where Iraq was firing Scud missiles at Israel, and the Patriots were trying to intercept them. And even when they succeeded, it still resulted in all this flaming wreckage coming down over occupied territory. Now, apparently, Washington and Ankara have reached a deal where the U.S. forces are going to remain in Manbij while the Kurds are going to leave. The Kurdish forces will be forced to withdraw from Manbij, Raqqa, and eastern Euphrates after the occupation of Afrin by Ankara and allied militants. And apparently this agreement to extend the U.S. mission, Turkish mission, in Syria. And so they're trying to change the map over there. The Kurds were, I guess, of use to Washington back when they were still thinking about balkanizing all those countries, but now they're just being disposed of. Over in Great Britain, they're still going round and round about what exactly happened to Skripal, Sergei Skripal, and was he actually poisoned with this Novichok, which was a Soviet development. And questions have been raised about how much Novichok was present at Porton Down. And Porton Down is out there saying there's just absolutely no way this nerve agent could escape our laboratory. Well, we know that's not true. We know that the anthrax that was sent to politicians and media following 9/11 came from Fort Detrick. The scientist there, Philip Zach, was caught on the security system going into the lab where that strain of anthrax was being kept after he'd already been fired. And that's the anthrax that wound up in the letter. So yes, it is possible that somebody could walk into Porton Down and acquire a sample of Novichok to basically hit this Russian agent with to kick off this whole anti-Russia furor. And I agree with the leadership of NATO. The reaction to this is completely out of proportion. And again, the part that's missing from this whole story is why Putin would have done this at this particular time. What Skripal did was years and years ago. It's part of history. Putin was working on his re-election. Putin is working on the World Cup. Putin is working on trying to tamp down some of these wars around the world. Why would he pick this particular moment to do something this stupid and obvious? And then, of course, there's Putin's own comment on this, that if he'd wanted Skripal dead, Skripal would be dead. This is Saddam's nuclear weapons, or Assad's sarin gas, all over again. Now, there's been a new piece of information that's come on out. Investigators were looking at the Skripal's cell phones for the father and the daughter. And apparently, or at least this is what we're being told, they were powered off on the day of the attack. There's no data, no location data, no tweets, no texts, no nothing. Now, were they powered off, or did somebody get to the cell phones and simply erase all the data? Now, over in France, President Macron is trying to cut their defense budget. And this has resulted in their military chief, 60-year-old Pierre de Villiers, basically resigning his position and saying that Macron is leaving France unprepared for future military necessities. Now, there's been an interesting development regarding Korea, North Korea. Apparently, Kim Jong-un took a train to Beijing for a surprise visit and meeting with high-level Chinese diplomats. And apparently, North Korea wants to move closer to China. And China might just be very, very receptive, because China's not feeling all that close with the United States of America at this particular point, over the issue of Taiwan, over the issue of the islands in the South China Sea. The problem with the U.S. government is they're making enemies all over the world all at the same time. And is our country really capable of making war on the entire planet all at the same time? We can't even handle the wars we've got. We're still mired in Afghanistan. We're still garrisoning Iraq, talking about staying in Turkey and Syria. We're not doing very well. Now would be the time to sort of start pulling back and consolidating the wars rather than go on out, especially when you consider that they're looking at going after military peers. The U.S. is really butch when it goes after little tiny countries with clearly inferior military forces. But going up against Russia or China, whole different story. Whole different story entirely. China, meanwhile, has launched a massive military drill in preparation for war. And apparently it involves those South China islands, it involves Taiwan. And the Air Force drills include H-6K bombers and Sukhoi 30 and Sukhoi 35 fighters, and have a very simple purpose. Air Force exercises are rehearsal for future wars and are the most direct preparation for war, the Chinese Air Force said on its Weibo account on Sunday. This is coming out of Reuters. So, little article that came on out from Zero Hedge, How the Military Controls America, and it's basically a rehash of the military-industrial complex. And it points out that defense contractors don't sell to consumers. They're not part of the consumer economy. These defense contractors like Lockheed Martin, they sell directly to the U.S. government. And they're totally dependent upon sales to governments for their profits, especially sales to the U.S. government, which they control because of heavy donations to members of Congress and the strategic awarding of subcontracts into the districts of congressmen who support the defense contractors. And this is exactly what Eisenhower warned us about the military-industrial complex, that it would break free of civil control and become a force and a power unto itself. And that's exactly what happened. And we live in a country where the military-industrial complex is willing to start wars and kill millions of people just to make a fast buck. And that kind of attitude seems to have spread to other parts of our society, such as a medical industrial complex that needs us all to be chronically ill to make a fast buck. Now, last night on 60 Minutes, former porn star Stormy Daniels did her interview saying Trump did this, Trump did that, and most people weren't paying attention. What they were paying attention to, her eyes were extremely dilated. And a lot of people are speculating that she was high as a kite on something. She was stoned during her 60 Minutes interview. More people are talking about that than her allegations against Donald Trump. Now, the U.S. has reached a trade deal with South Korea, where South Korea will voluntarily reduce the amount of steel they send to the United States. Mnuchin is hopeful of a trade truce with China. And as a result, the stock market is doing very well today. Last time I checked, the Dow was up by about 600. So the money junkies are happy with all of this. Story coming out of Russia today, pointing out that more European nations are asking to repatriate their gold. It's become a trend all across the EU. They want their physical gold back. They want it back from the Bank of England, the Bank of France, the New York Fed, and the other gold depositories. And according to this article, this basically signals that these European nations want to be in a position to issue a new value-based currency backed by gold in the event the euro starts to crumble. And the euro is under a huge amount of stress right now. Getting on back to the LIBOR, and I'm sure you remember the LIBOR rigging scandal. A lot of people are noticing that the spread between the 3-month LIBOR and the overnight interbank lending rate has risen to the highest level since the financial crisis. And this is viewed as a sign of rising financial stress. And there may be other dynamics at work that suggest the rise is not due to increased financial stress, but simple technical factors like the liquidation of commercial paper as part of the repatriation of overseas funds on the part of large American companies. They're pulling the money back in. They're trying to pull the money back in inside our own borders so it doesn't become a hostage to the coming war. Everyone's hunkering down here. Remington has finally officially filed for bankruptcy. I was hoping that the sudden surge in gun purchases following the latest gun grabber might save them. But again, as one of the callers into the show pointed out, the original Remington was a very fine weapon. And then they got bought out by a new owner who proceeded to value engineer the guns into something a little less than wonderful. I remember there was a few years ago where Remington had a real problem with rifles that would accidentally discharge if struck hard. And that's a real bad thing to have. And I think that may very well have been why Remington got into trouble. Nobody wants to buy an untrustworthy firearm. You want it to be safe. You don't want it to fire until you intend that it should fire. But they are basically filing for bankruptcy. Now, the filing allows Remington to stay in business and try to restructure its massive debt. And I wish them luck. You know, I really do. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take a couple of phone calls, starting with Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha, Kevin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. The things in D.C., the marches and the rallies in D.C. are on my mind, and this whole Second Amendment thing. I don't know if you've seen the pictures of David Hogg and his speech over the weekend, but wow, he's drunk on power. Or this whole for a young person to be in the spotlight. He's completely, like I said, drunk on power. And his little speech about how the power structure is shaking in the boots. My question is, why would the power structure be shaking when this is the same power structure that he's calling for us to turn our guns into? I mean, if Trump is so-called Hitler, like the liberals say they are, why would you turn your firearms into so-called Hitler? I'm confused on that logic.
Well, obviously, so are they. And, of course, the liberal agenda is they want all guns banned so that they can continue carrying out the liberal agenda, which does involve a lot of intrusive behavior towards the individual citizen. But, you know, the argument doesn't make sense because from their point of view, it doesn't have to. It's just pure jingoism and slogans and emotional appeals. And they're hoping that people aren't going to think the matter through rationally. But they are desperate to disarm the American people. And we should hang on to those guns as hard as we can. Because if they're treating us this badly while we're still armed, imagine how much worse it's going to be when we're helpless. Now, I understand that nowhere near as many people actually showed up for these marches as the gun grabbers were claiming were going to show on up. There were a couple of embarrassments as well, because apparently one of the entertainers they had there was this rapper, Vic Mensa. He was performing for the gun control crowd in Washington, D.C. It turns out he was arrested last year for carrying a concealed weapon. And he was actually charged for carrying an unregistered loaded firearm, but that charge was later dropped. So again, we're seeing double standards and hypocrisy, like we see from people like Dianne Feinstein, who absolutely wants to ban guns, but she carries concealed herself. They think they should be allowed to have guns, but we should not.
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree with what you're saying. It's just, even if you don't even try to think this one out, I don't see how you cannot come to the same conclusion that I came to, that, okay, so-called Hitler wants the guns, but let's turn our guns into so-called Hitler. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make any
rallies,
sense. There's another irony there, and that is, of course, that Hitler made a great use of children's marches. In Nazi Germany, the Hitler Youth Corps were out there saying, we're the children, we're the future, we demand that Germany obey the Fuhrer.
Absolutely. That was one of the things that I had to do yesterday was pull up some old videos or old recordings of Hitler speaking to the youth. I mean, the same thing that happened in D.C. happened in Nazi Germany. We're witnessing history all over again.
Yeah, and it's a very, very bad and dangerous history.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's all I wanted to pick your brain about today, sir. You give Miss Claire the best, and I hope you have a great and wonderful show.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I'll pass on your greetings to the lovely Lady Claire. And we're going to switch over to Dave in Missouri. And Dave, I'm probably going to have to take you through this next commercial break, but what's on your mind?
Well, howdy, Mike. Hope you're doing well today. It's certainly beautiful here in North Carolina. I want to give Kevin from West Virginia my best. One of my most favorite states to be able to travel through. I came through there last week when it was covered in snow. Just gorgeous. But you know what's on my mind, Mike? You brought up Remington. I mean, to me, this is just a symbol of what I call the Walmartization of America, of the American economy, where everything is reduced to the bottom common denominator. Quality be damned. It's all about profit. And when a great American company that really inspired so much confidence and produced so much prosperity for the community, like Remington, goes the Walmart route of made in China, of inferior product, of just gut the cost out of everything to maximize your profit, your consumer notices. And really, there is no more discerning consumer than the American who wants to purchase a lasting firearm. You're not purchasing a throwaway microwave. You're not purchasing a coffee maker that you know is not going to last more than 60 days. You're purchasing something you expect to last you a lifetime and that you can pass along to your children that should survive their lifetimes. You know, and so to me, the government is only as corrupt as the hearts of the people are. And when the American consumer decided to trade their hometown's prosperity and economic security for fall apart, made in China garbage built for the landfill from Walmart, well, that enabled then the government to completely undermine us, not just economically, but social or geopolitically. And, you know, this whole thing with the gun march. I hear your music, brother.
Yeah,
Can you hang me over?
Stay on the line. Stay on the line. I'm going to hold you over, and we'll come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking with Dave in Missouri, and we're talking about what he terms the Walmartization of the United States. And it's not entirely the fault of the American people. As the economy has tightened, the American people are looking to acquire what they need at the lowest possible cost. And I agree with you, especially when you're talking about firearms. This is a very, very dangerous path to be on. We saw the same thing happen with Hewlett-Packard. It was a wonderful company, good reputation, good products, worth the money that you spent on them. Then Messrs. Hewlett and Packard left, and it was taken over by Carla Fiorini, I think it was, who immediately value engineered the products to maximize profits and keep the stockholders happy, and they produced just absolute junk. And when Claire and I were trying to start our production company here in Hawaii, because of my past experience with Hewlett-Packard, we bought a bunch of Hewlett-Packard equipment, and it was all junk. The CD burners would last maybe 2 weeks. We had one Hewlett-Packard computer that had a design flaw where it would simply lock up at random intervals, and that's not something you want to have on a rendering computer. I remember years ago when I was more heavily into photography than I am now, Vivitar was kind of a mid-level brand, but they produced a good product at a good price. And I bought my first wife this Vivitar camera that was being sold in a store in Southern California. And it was battery operated, but they had actually put the battery compartment in where the film goes. And if the battery died, there was no way to rewind the film back into the cassette. And if you opened the camera to change the battery, you would destroy all the photos that you'd taken. That's just absolute bad engineering. And I'd found out that Vivitar's name had been licensed by an American company. And we've seen way too much of this, where name brand companies that built their brand on a reputation of quality are acquired and then basically exploited for quick profit. And this is a management decision. So it's not entirely the fault of the consumers. As the economy tightens, manufacturers are looking for more profits, and people are just looking to get what they need to have at a lower cost. And ultimately, you reach a point where the option isn't there. We're certainly seeing that today in the computer market, where computers only last 3 to 5 years, or cell phones. And I've gone into these stores and said, I am willing to pay more money for something that will last. It's just not available. The business model, as you said, is they're creating fodder for the landfills. They're forcing us to buy the same thing over and over again just to stay where we are. And we're just working ourselves to death, just trying to maintain our current lifestyle rather than to improve it. And that really is one of the classic signs of fascism.
You know, Mike, I completely agree with you that at this point, you know, it's not really the consumer's fault because all of the options have been reduced to this bare minimum. But you know, I'm an old man like you. I mean, I'm 50. I consider myself old.
You're a kid to me.
Recruited out of high school by Sam. Yeah, well, I know. I'm sorry. I always have to catch myself because there are people who think that I'm still a young man, but I don't feel that way when I wake up in the morning. You know, and so. But I was recruited out of high school by Sam Walton. At that point, it was an American company. I was very proud to be a part of it. But what I've seen over the period of the late 80s, early 90s, as everything transitioned, Walmart bought Bill, the presidency. He signed NAFTA, GATT, WTO, normalized trade with communist China. Not 5 years after they were rolling the kids over with the tanks in Tiananmen Square. Had no military. Today we get to face a very formidable military purchased by Walmart shoppers for the communist Chinese. Now, we can maybe disagree about the nature of the communist Chinese, but what my point was that now the American consumer is in this position. They weren't there 30 years ago when they lined up to buy this cheap garbage at the expense of the factories in their own hometowns. So while maybe now we're in the fool's trap of our own demise, that fool's trap was very much secured 30, 25, 20 years ago by people who should have known better than to cut the throats of their neighbors for a dollar savings on an utter piece of crap replica of the American-made merchandise that was being produced in our own factories in our own hometowns and
Okay,
secured the great American middle class. Yes, sir.
Dave, you've got your timeline a little bit wrong. The problem actually goes all the way back to right after World War II, the baby boomer generation.
Well, I've heard that. I've heard that, but what I seen was it go on steroids in the late 80s and 90s, and through the 90s it was just a rush to the bottom so far as quality and maximizing profit for the corporations were concerned. So
yeah, but it was a corporate decision. It was a corporate decision to send the manufacturing overseas. They didn't want to get their hands dirty.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, yeah, and Walmart profits went from 20 to 25% on American-made merchandise to triple digits on the import stuff that we started seeing. So, yeah, the money was the issue, but the consumer also played a role in that. And, my last point, and I know you got to go on, man, these kids these days, they just have no concept of history at all. And so to listen to them talk, the ignorance that comes out of their mouths, it's like they just woke up and suddenly discovered something new under the sun. No, every time a society has their Second Amendment, we call it Second Amendment, every time gun confiscation occurs, it's followed by tyrannical oppression of the people. It's always been the case, and these kids are just fools and fodder for those who want to absolutely destroy America and take it down the same path we've seen every other great society that was had their gun rights stripped away from them and become defenseless to a tyrannical state. And at that, I'm going to wish you and Mrs. Claire and your audience my best, and I love you, Mike.
Thank you very much. Brother. Thank you for the kind words. But the reason the younger generation...
Please support RBN. Please, people, support RBN. I challenge you, as my wife and I have, please become full-time sponsors. RBN has a budget like you do. They have to know what they can count on. Please find a way to financially support RBN, especially now when the truth is under such assault. You're only going to hear it from Mike, and when Mike's gone, then what? So we have to support it if we want it to continue, and I'll let you go. I love you. Bye.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you very much for those kind words. And yes, RBN, we both need your support. RBN does, whatreallyhappened.com. We're hanging on the edge here. Nobody's getting rich doing this. We're on the edge. We're losing sleep. This stuff actually keeps us up at night. It really does. Now, getting on back to what Dave was saying, the reason the younger generation are walking around apparently clueless about history is because the education system wanted them that way. And we all know about the evils of Common Core, where they actually made doing calculations in your head more difficult than methods that we older people learned in school. They've twisted and distorted much of American history. Common Core was teaching that the Second Amendment gives you the right to keep and bear arms only if you're part of a government-controlled militia. That's not what the Second Amendment says at all. So we've talked through the years about the dumbing down of America, and we are now seeing it directly. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Chris in St. Petersburg. Aloha, Chris. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
It's the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas three-ring circus, and to point out that in the Hitler comparison, I found an interesting scarf that a thrift shop discarded, and it says Adolf Hitler Schulen. It's Adolf Hitler, Schulen, meaning Adolf Hitler schools.
Yes.
So that's a testimony to the conspicuous propaganda, and it's just kind of funny that somebody who's still alive is having their name put on the name of a school that for the glorious imperious leader, and I think that's why we could. One motivation to impeach Trump for constitutionally undeclared wars. But, one interesting thing about David Hogg is that while he's in hiding in the dark and interviewing his fellow students, maybe he thought these were his last words, so he wanted to have them recorded like a message in a bottle for quote-unquote sensible gun control. And it seems strange to some, but, I'll give him that. But, this interview with his fellow students was shortly after or during shots being fired, and in which David Hogg said that Nicholas Cruz was the suspected shooter. Now, that would not be known until later. They're sitting there in hiding, and, you can watch the video of this interview where that's what David Hogg says.
Yes.
And, these kinds of points need to be brought up on talk shows if they'll take your calls, as often they don't take mine anymore when there's self-described local liberal station. Why don't they protest the cops standing down? If you want only the military and the cops to have the firearms or the heavy firearms, the military grade, they say, and they do nothing to defend you, well, then where does that leave you? When Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel was asked by Tucker Carlson if he ordered the stand down, he refused to answer. What about protesting his refusal to answer, his abuse of discretion? For them to claim that the officers were claiming they didn't have their body cams, so they weren't ready to go in. Well, isn't that kind of a backhanded way to blame we who call for cops having body cams? That's how I read that. And why don't the children protest the 9/11 lies that are in their school books and all the other propaganda used to go to war? Why don't they walk out for that? Why don't they protest the video of the pickup truck and the 4 cops who are removing evidence? The 2 cops that took to bring out that duffel bag, throw it in the back of the white pickup truck, and drive away.
Because nobody's paying them to. Nobody's paying them to. Somebody raised a lot of money. It's a 501c4. We don't know where the money originally came from, but all these kids got a free trip to Washington, D.C. It may have been the first time in their lives. And so they're all excited. We're going to go to Washington. We're going to march. We're going to protest. And then we get to go visit the Smithsonian.
Yeah, there's that motivation there. Whenever there's a stand down, there's definitely a conspiracy to deprive you of your money, your rights, your lives. Like 9/11 was a false flag, this thinly veiled lame excuse to attack the developed Muslim nations around Israel. So the anti-war folks fellow anti-war folks need to recognize that. And the drills that in the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas massacre were a cover for terrorism, just as in 9/11. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of funny that Dave Hogg is wearing an armband that is reminiscent of the Nazis. It's really funny, but it's like they want to be unconvincing and as intimidating as possible, or why don't they try to persuade the gun owners to surrender their guns in a more persuasive way rather than trying to be so intimidating?
Well, because there's no persuasive argument. Some bad people did bad things with guns, but bad people do bad things with cars. Bad people do bad things with baseball bats. But nobody suggests banning baseball or taking cars away from everybody. And gun owners are basically looking at the same thing. The vast majority of gun owners are law-abiding and very careful with their weapons. And this idea of banning all guns. And notice that they're always targeting the assault weapons, the ones that would give the American people the means to resist intrusive government. They're not out there screaming about Saturday night specials or the cheap throwaway guns, which are the guns that are overwhelmingly used in crime in this country. They're specifically trying to target the assault weapons that would allow us to hold off tyranny.
Exactly. Yeah. And they say, well, how can you resist the government's we have overwhelming force? Well, what about the Vietnamese? They did pretty darn well.
Yep.
And for anybody who may doubt that there were drills going on, or a scheduled drill, I know you're aware that the teacher, Ernest Rospierski, said that on the video, on the AP video, said that the school was having a scheduled code red drill where officers were going to be firing blanks, and the shooter he saw had on a mask. Then teacher Stacy Lapel said the shooter was wearing full body armor, helmet, and a face mask. And then when interviewed by Matt Musil, KHOW reporter, Alexa Miednik, the student, said she was speaking with Nicholas Cruz as the shooting was happening. No mention of him with the mask or other garb. The student, Alexa Miednik, said, quote, so there definitely had to be two shooters. So, apparently, according to all these accounts, there were more than one shooter. And the last point is that I have here is that James Fetzer I know you disagree with him on stuff, and he was incorrect on saying that Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School was in Debbie Wasserman Schultz's congressional district. It's Ted Deutsch's congressional district. So there's a lot of good information in his interview with Kerry Cassidy on Project Camelot.
Mm-hmm.
There's a good slideshow on that. So I wanted to refer folks to that. It's just so much. It's a mini documentary in itself. But I understand you have your differences. And
well, I do. But again, sometimes he gets it right. We all know that Parkland was a staged event. Just like we know that Sandy Hook was a staged event, Columbine was a staged event. And again, it always focuses on the assault weapons. And it always seems to involve patsies who are stoned out of their mind on prescription antidepressant drugs.
Yep, it does indeed. So, that's, for any acts of violence, it doesn't matter whether it's with any weapon or no weapon at all. There's always the antidepressant, anti-anxiety medications that they've either been on or they're coming off of, so they're suffering from withdrawals. There are so many sweet people who have been taking these, and then they become twisted and tortured and struggling to get off of them because they've never, and I know you've mentioned the same for yourself, and
yep.
All of a sudden you notice you're having nutty ideas to hurt yourself or other people, and you wonder, wow, that's amazing. I've never thought of this before. It must be the medication. So, what about the sensitivity for not just the gunshot victims, but those who are being tortured by these medications?
Well, because the medications are making money. Anyway, Chris, I got to let you go. We got to do another break for commercials. We got another caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take another phone call. Scott in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Michael, you have touched upon several things today, one after the other. This thing about this gun control stuff, though. So yes, if anybody looks into it, scratches a little bit, you're going to see that these are staged events. And many of them, people are actually dying. And then it looks like they got kill teams going around, cleaning up inconvenient witnesses, if you will. But what has my attention in this is when you're talking with somebody who is an ideologue, where they got these ideas in their heads and you just can't shake them.
Yep.
I showed my cousin, who was a medical doctor with a PhD. I showed her the Robbie Parker video, trying to show her that this stuff is staged. The one where he's laughing, looking at his little cue card, and then going into character and talking about his dead daughter.
Yep.
I showed her that, and she didn't get it. And I went, wow. And then I reran it and showed it to her again. I said, don't you see that? And she didn't get it. I mean, I don't understand this, how people can look at something and not see it. it's just, but they're pulling out the stops for this one. You know,
They really are. Well, it's
so-
called scotoma, which it means the mind sees what it wants to see. And there are, unfortunately, sadly, a great many Americans who just don't want to face up to what the U.S. government has become. And they're just caught in their own little world. And you're going to find it, unfortunately, mostly among the upwardly mobile people. They've got very comfortable lives. They don't want anything to disturb that at all. And they don't want to have to face up to that question of, our government has gone wrong. Should I do something about it? So that's basically what we're dealing with.
They just have to ask. Yep. Hey, going over to this China stuff, I was living in China for a while some years back, and this friend of mine, she owned a little shop selling clothing, and she had brand new North Face jackets for $25. And they were perfect. And I said, well, how do you guys do this? I mean, I know this jacket. It's $190 in the States. And she said, well, the people who work at the North Face factory, they go around the corner when they're off shift, and they have the same equipment. They order from the same material suppliers, and they produce it. And you can tell that they're not real North Face because they're missing, I don't know, she pointed it out. It was like 3 little tags that are not there. And I went, wait a minute, man, but they were $25. Well, if they're making a profit at selling them for $25, who's making the money when they're over here in the States for $190? You know?
Yeah. Well, again, that's one of the issues Trump has with China is the pirating of brands and the copying of intellectual property. And part of that is that consumers like to look for brands. They want to be hip, they want to have the latest, or they're going to buy a brand they think does represent quality. And it is a big problem. It is a big problem. Anyway, listen, we got to take a break here for station identification. Thank you for the phone call, Scott. We're going to let you go, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and let's pick up with the economic news. We were talking about Remington having filed for bankruptcy protection. They're going to try and reorganize their debt and stay in business. And I hope they understand that producing a quality product is going to be essential to the company's continued survival. Because recently they've had a very, very bad reputation. And especially, I mean, it's one thing to value engineer a cell phone or something like that. But when you're talking about a gun, you have to enforce quality. And as I said, some years ago, Remington had a problem with certain of its rifles accidentally discharging when they were struck or when you dropped them. And that is definitely not something that should have ever, ever, ever happened. Now then, Tesla, apparently, according to this article in Investment Watch blog, is also on the verge of bankruptcy. And it is a shame because they are wonderful cars, but apparently the market isn't quite ready for them. They're still very expensive to produce. And it really is a shame because I was watching Top Gear last night, the new one on BBC. And everybody on the show is saying, yeah, the petrol days are ending. The future is going to be hybrid or electric. And they were talking about this latest offering from Ferrari, which is this 12-cylinder V8 engine. And they were saying, this is the last time we'll ever see this. This is all going away. And I'm in agreement. And when Claire and I had to get a replacement for our stolen Honda, we did try and look at hybrids or all-electric vehicles. They were unfortunately way out of our price range, and we did not want to take out a car loan because of what the economy is doing right now. So it is a shame. I think Tesla was doing some really good work. But again, we're in an economy where we're seeing a lot of companies with iconic names going out of business. Toys R Us is going to close down this month. And their partner store, Babies R Us, is also closing down. And that's a problem for Uncle Mike and Auntie Claire, because we're having a mini baby boom in our little courtyard of condos here. We've had two newborns just this last month alone. So that's an issue. But they're owned by the same parent company, and they're going away. We go down to the local malls. We're seeing all this retail vacancy space. We're wondering when we're going to lose Sears. and the American people are broke, and we cannot support a consumer economy. And even worse, here's where it's headed ultimately. When stores like Sears go out of business and they go away, especially on an island like this, the people who repair and service products from Sears, like dishwashers and such, they're going to go out of business as well. And that means because of planned obsolescence, the appliances and products that we have already bought will stop working 3 to 5 years down the road, and we won't be able to repair them, and we won't be able to replace them. And we're basically seeing the fall of our civilization. Now, China all of a sudden is pouring huge amounts of investment into Sri Lanka. And of course, when you pour huge investment into a region, it basically brings you closer to that region. It gives you influence over that region. And this, of course, is worrying India and the West. How dare China move in on Sri Lanka? That's supposed to be part of the American empire. Okay, let's take some more phone calls. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I wonder when those kids are going to march for stop arming terrorist Stinger and TOW missiles.
I agree. Maybe they're trying to get the kids all riled up about gun control so they don't realize they should be out there protesting the wars. I remember back in the 60s, massive demonstrations against the war in Vietnam. Lyndon Johnson wrote in his autobiography that when he looked out onto that mall outside the White House and saw 1 million people there, that was the day he realized they'd lost the war in Vietnam.
Yeah, it's too bad nobody marches against wars anymore, huh? Not like that. Huh?
Well, we did for a while. We did for a while. When the second war in Iraq started, there were a lot of protests here in Hawaii. I took a lot of videos and pictures. But the corporate media just ignored us, and after a while, people get the message. The media's not paying attention, the government isn't paying attention, and they basically just stopped doing that. I remember one time where there was an anti-war demonstration, basically against the second invasion of Iraq, and right across the street was a pro-war organized demonstration funded by Clear Channel, who is now iHeartMedia, who is now also facing bankruptcy, and the local NBC affiliate drove up, parked right next to our anti-war demonstration, walked right through without even stopping, and went on over and did a story about the pro-war demonstration, which was filled with a bunch of people because they were handing out free sodas and free hot dogs. You can always get a crowd if you're handing out free food. Then they packed up their equipment, turned around again, walked right through the anti-war demonstration without stopping, got in their van, and headed back to the NBC affiliate.
Yeah, how can anybody be pro-war? Isn't that insane? You know, like just that mentality itself. If there was like even one person that's pro, I mean, insanity, Mike. You know, it's just insane. You know,
well,
something's gone wrong in this country. We all know that.
It's less about saying the war is good, is about we have to support our troops, our country, right or wrong. You know, even though the war be wrong, we are in it. We must fight it out. We cannot retire without dishonor. And, it's jingoism. It's slogans, and it's played the same way throughout America's history. And nobody wants to be accused of not supporting our troops, and they equate supporting our troops with supporting the war. Well, that's an absolute fiction. I support our troops. Claire supports our troops. We're very concerned about those who are coming back from the war zones with serious, permanent, debilitating injuries, and they're not being given adequate care by the VA. But we oppose the wars for very logical, rational reasons.
Yeah, isn't it amazing? Our own government don't support the troops because the VA is like a disgrace since the Civil War, probably, right?
Well, the attitude of the government is, you know, once the soldiers are no longer useful, why bother? That they're seen as a disposable commodity in the name of the war.
And Mike, I don't know if you mentioned this yet. I want to switch gears. What's your take? The Petro Yuan started today.
Yeah, we're going to talk about it in a little bit. In fact, it's the second item down on my current list. But apparently, it's a huge volume. It's a huge volume.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining the network, and we're going to go to Errol in the Netherlands. Aloha, Errol. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Errol in the Netherlands, are you there? I do not hear Errol. We lost him. All right. All right, maybe he'll call back in. Okay, getting on back to the economy. Over in Great Britain, the British government has announced that they are going to seize Russian assets of doubtful origin or of dubious origin. That's a very fuzzy definition, but apparently they've already issued warrants to basically go on out and do a grab of any Russian assets. And when you have a standard of dubious origin, that could mean pretty much all of it. And it's another provocation against Russia. Now, getting on back to what we were talking. Oh, Errol in the Netherlands. Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello? Am I online?
You're on the air.
Okay. It amazed me how ignorant nowadays these students are, and when you see those massive public standing there, nothing about the illegal wars, nothing about the gun sales to Saudi Arabia, to ISIS. Well, they didn't exactly sell them, America, but they did a wrong. How do you call it? A drop. You drop something with your plane, and grenades or
bombs,
weapons. Yeah,
bombs.
Oh, it's wrong. You know, wrong. When we have all this technology, I want to say one thing. My father was Turkish. We went into the woods. We went with guns and everything. I know how to shoot. And what they don't say, the AR-15 is a sports rifle.
Yes.
It's a sports rifle. Nobody says that. You don't see in a war, you don't see an AR-15. Never.
No.
Only see heavy guns or whatever. But when I saw that, and it was very interesting to see that they want to take now when we are calculating 2001 to nowadays. So when you calculate when the parents from the students had kids, they were like in 1995. So they are 4, 5, like, you know, you can calculate. So now they are going to brainwash them. So like, oh, guns are the problem. Well, I can say to you, in the future, maybe I am a problem. You know why? I did fighting sports. Maybe a human will become a problem. When you do fighting sports, it's also a weapon.
Yes.
So they have no idea what a weapon is. The only thing what I see now happening is they want to take away the Second Amendment. And anyways, when I want to have a gun, I can go anywhere where I want. I can have a gun. Huh?
Yes.
No problem. I can have a gun. Doesn't matter. And they don't say nothing about it, about the SSRIs. Nothing about the pills that these people, the most of them that are involved in these shootings, they are on SSRIs. They are mostly between 20 and 30 years old, not above that. When you calculate that,
yes.
20 years, 30 years. So, what is your take on that?
Well, again, I grew up in a gun culture. When I was young, I even built black powder firearms. This idea that you can be safe by being disarmed is nonsense. All you need to do is look at any tyranny in history, like the Soviet Union under Stalin or Germany under the Nazis, and realize that disarming makes you a victim of the government. And these kids going around saying they have a right to safety. And by the way, I've read the Constitution. There's no right to safety listed in there anywhere. If you want to be safe, then you need to be armed and prepared to defend yourself. Because as Parkland demonstrated, you cannot count on the police to come in and help you.
Yeah. And that's a fact. And I saw nothing from that, and they were crying. One was, have you seen that one that was puking?
Yeah, yeah, I heard about that.
She was on stage and she was puking. I was like, do you, I don't say it, beep on your own, beep, beep?
Yeah.
She was puking. I was like, what is this for performance? This was really staged. And I want to say, this is the last thing, I'm going to hang up. And thank you for taking my call. This was, this is an, how do you call it? A learning phase for the old generation to see how the new days students are brainwashed. This is total brainwashing. Hey, and many of them have never handled a gun, shot a gun, or do not understand what protection is.
No, a lot of these people that are out there talking about banning guns, it's very obvious. It's very obvious. They don't know what they're talking about.
I hunted with my father in Turkey, and when we hunted something, we shot it. We were sitting on the place. We ate it. We ate it.
Yes.
Because my father always said, when you hunt something, you eat it. You don't let it die. You go there, and if it's still alive, you take care of it, and then you eat it. Nowadays, they are like, oh, a gun. No, guns don't kill people. People kill people. That's it. The psychological warfare. That is what they want to do. They say, oh, a gun is dangerous. Look at Chicago. What is happening there? They banned what was it in Chicago? You can elaborate it. You can elaborate on it. In Chicago, always, yeah.
Yes.
There were guns always in Chicago. Chicago is always mafia and everything. But they banned it. It was a free zone. Only the mafia nowadays have guns in Chicago. It's true. It's a fact. If you are if you are living in a home there, you have no right for a gun. You can go to the police, and then 1 hour later they come when the crime has happened.
Yeah, that's the real problem there with all of this idea about not having a right to protect our homes. The police are never there when the crime is actually in progress. They show up afterwards, clean up the mess, pose for the newspaper photos, and try and act like they're relevant to the process. But as Parkland showed, no, they're not. And you cannot count on the police.
Thank you for taking my call, Mike.
All right, you got it. You cannot count on the police to protect you from violent crime. They're under no legal obligation to do so. And it's ridiculous. We'll get back to that a little bit further on down in the talking points. Meanwhile, we're going to take another phone call from Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Mark, are you there? Mark, are you there? Okay, you're on the air. What's on your mind?
Well, first of all, I wanted to say about what you were saying, why people aren't demonstrating, why you don't have the peace demonstrations. Very simple. 4-letter word, draft. Not a draft, they'd be rioting in the streets. I can guarantee you that.
I agree.
Probably making it look like be on steroids. The other thing I wanted
that's what really kicked things off back during Vietnam, absolutely. They're trying to hold off on a draft until they can convince the American people it's absolutely necessary, because we got to fight those gosh darn Ruskies and those gosh darn Chinese. But you're right, that will kick the protests into high gear.
They'd need a draft, even if they were just going to go, let's say Houston decide, you know what, you idiots want to make fools out of yourself, and you want to go and have, turmoil in your country, and go right ahead and go to war with Iran and Syria and see what happens. And we'll just support them with weapons, because that would be enough. They would need a draft for that, because you got a demoralized military today. You're not going to get enough volunteers. You have to go for a draft. People are not that stupid anymore.
They're not just demoralized because so few people are signing up for the military, even with the economic pressure to do so. The military have had to lower their standards. They're taking people who would have been rejected for service only a few years ago. Overweight, obese, mental issues. This is not going to be an effective fighting force. And if they think they're going to draft an effective army from all these liberal snowflakes who burst into tears when Donald Trump speaks, how do they expect these kids to go up against a real serious enemy with intent to harm them?
Of course, there's no way. And the other thing is, like I say too, if it, God forbid, it does become the United States and Russia, and I don't know if when you talk about a draft, because I don't know how much. I think the world would probably be at an end, or at least the world as we know it, within a couple of days. Let's pray to God that doesn't happen. But the other thing I wanted to bring up.
Well, I'm going to have to put you on hold. Mark, stay on the line. We got to do a break for commercials, and I'll come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're still on the line with Mark in North Carolina. And you're absolutely right. When they formally announce a draft, that's when everybody's going to get mobilized, because that's what happened back during Vietnam. Prior to the draft, there were people who were opposed to Vietnam, but it wasn't really a big movement. As soon as the draft was announced, that's when things lit up. And I think that's why our government has tried to avoid a draft up until this point. They're trying to basically boost recruitment with a lot of advertising on TV. In fact, I just got an email from somebody saying that they saw a commercial for high school graduates to enlist in the military. The commercial was in Spanish. They're hitting all the markets, apparently. But it's, recruitment is down, and everybody's complaining about it. And they're taking people who are not really very good. And that may have been the reason we've had all these ship collisions out here in the Pacific. The bridge crews just don't have the smarts or don't have the mental discipline to observe the rules of good navigation. And they get in there with that little wheel in their hands and they go, "Eehaw, I can play chicken with a cargo ship," and it doesn't really work out that well.
Well, you have examples too. You had the who's the guy that traded all those so-called supposedly terrorists for Bergdahl? And you also had this guy, this Air Force guy who shot up that church there, killed all those people at that church.
Yep.
Who was actually, mentally deranged. The Air Force used to be one of the hardest of all the military to even get into, let alone a nutcase like that. And even in the Army standards were pretty high, actually, after 9/11. Because they had plenty of recruits, because people believed the BS the government was selling them. But I want to get back to David Hogg.
Yes.
First of all, there's no way kid, if you want to call him a kid, is a teenager. He's got to be, I'd say, at least 25. Looking at him, listening to him speak, and all that.
Yes.
I don't know who he is. Whether his name is really even David Hogg or not. I have a feeling he might be CIA or FBI, just like his father, supposed father. And another thing is, I was listening to a show this week on the net, on YouTube, with, I don't know if you ever heard of Holy Demigard.
No.
I know he's been on Richie Apple quite a bit. I thought you might know him. And the other guy is Jason Goodman. He was conducting the interviews. He's an investigative reporter.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had Cody Snodgrass, who's a former operator. He's a former contractor, the CIA, who was asked to blow up the Murrah building a year before it was blown up, and says, no, get somebody else for that. And he finally come clean. He was in different shows like John B. Wells and Hagman and Hagman. And this guy is, I believe he's legit. and they were talking about the various, false flag demagogue. I mean, I think he's from Sweden, and he goes over one after the other. All the clues, they leave a lot of clues, probably because the New World Order, I think that's almost ritualistic to them. And,
no, it's just these are very sloppy jobs. They make mistakes, bad things happen, and they have become dependent that the media will not report on the mistakes that they're making to the public. That's the job of the independent media, and that's why they're trying to find a way to shut us down now.
I mean, you got to be a total idiot to believe that Sheriff Israel is just plain stupid and didn't, told us. But he was told by the FBI to stand down. This guy Cruz is nothing but a patsy who they were saving. That's why they arrested him. And those 4 people that exited the school there, 3 or 4, I don't think those are police officers. They were the shooters. Okay, to the kind of gear, because I really, as low life as some police are, I don't think you could really get, nickel and dime police to go in there and do something like that, to murder kids in cold blood.
It's entirely possible they were just as police officers, as part of their disguise.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but they knew. But at the same time, I think Israel knew, and the FBI probably employed these guys. They're contractors. Probably just like Snodgrass, but Snodgrass wouldn't do stuff like that. And I think that's who those guys were, and they're the ones who I believe did the shooting.
Yes.
As the teacher saw a guy he saw was in SWAT gear. I heard other kids talking about Army people in there. Okay, while the shooting was going on, there were no Army people in there, and there were no SWAT members in there. These are the people doing the shooting. Cruz probably didn't do anything. As a matter of fact, that girl was actually talking to Cruz. He wasn't armed at the time. He had his backpack, but nothing else. And she heard the shots from another part of the school. I'm sure you saw that. That's also
I saw that. We had it posted at whatreallyhappened.com. And yeah, this is obviously another staged event. I agree with you. I think that the 4 men with the pickup truck were the real shooters that went on in and blew some kids away to support the gun grab agenda. And yeah, the police were ordered to stand down. I mean, this flimsy excuse, you don't have your body camera, so you can't go on in and save these kids from being slaughtered. And especially the stand down of the emergency medical technicians, that definitely increased the death rate from people just bleeding out on the floor, people who could have been saved. Sure. Anyway, Mark, got to let you go, got to do another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Getting on back to the news, and we mentioned this briefly before with a caller. China has launched its yuan-denominated crude oil futures. It launched overnight in Shanghai with 62,500 contracts traded in aggregate. That's over 62 million barrels of oil changed hands for a notional volume of around 27 billion yuan. And apparently this dominated the Brent. The big traders are stepping on in, and a lot of people are very concerned that China has just fired a shot across the bow of the U.S. paper dollar. Meanwhile, in Hollywood, my old stomping ground, they've had a pretty bad season. They've had the worst March in recent memory. They're pinning their hopes on Steven Spielberg's Ready Player One, which opens Thursday, the eve of Easter weekend. Now, March is not really a time when you put out the blockbusters. The blockbusters come out summer season and over the Christmas season. But the reality is that Hollywood has become a liberal propaganda machine. And if it's not propagandizing liberalism, it's remaking movies we've already seen several times before, coupled with the fact that people just don't have the money to pay for entertainment. And yeah, Hollywood's in trouble. And in one way, Hollywood kind of did it to themselves because they went through their own version of McCarthyism, where really creative people who dared to think independently, were basically driven out of the industry. And so now it's a bunch of liberal groupthink, and what they're putting out is really not very good entertainment at all. And that's why films being made in other countries are doing so much better. Hollywood used to dominate the film industry around the world. Now it's just another player. Now, for those of you who are considering enlisting in the military, so that you can win a green card. Here's a cautionary note. This is coming out of Lizadisu Blogspot. Apparently, there's a U.S. Army veteran who served 2 tours in Afghanistan, and he's just been deported back to Mexico, according to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And the deportation follows an earlier decision by U.S. authorities to deny this Miguel Perez's citizenship application because of a felony drug conviction, despite his service and the PTSD he says it caused. So when that recruiter comes around into the illegal immigrant neighborhoods and starts waving green cards, may not play out. If you have any kind of a felony conviction in your background, you could be deported anyway, even after serving in the war zones here. Now, there has been a terrible terror attack in France, and apparently the perpetrator walked his little sister to school. Then he hijacked a car, killing 1 person. Then he fired at a group of police officers. 1 of them died. And then he stormed a supermarket, killing 2 more people before being shot dead. So tell me how that open borders thing is working on out. Apparently the killer has been identified as ISIS. Now Phoenix has dropped its sanctuary city status. And as a result, crime has gone down. Now you think about that for a little while. All the sanctuary cities, crime is on the increase. Violent crime is on the increase. Those sanctuary cities are starting to look like Europe. A member put up one of these videos from France, where these refugees basically occupied this basilica where the French royalty is buried. And the police had to go on in and get them out. It turned really, really violent. All around us, with our eyes, we can see how this culture shock, clash of civilizations is not working on out. And still you have people like Soros and Merkel who are saying open borders are a good thing. Open borders are a good thing. So a bunch of women in Sweden are being raped. I mean, really, you guys are just so picky. It's a small price to pay for the one world government. The European Union is under tremendous stress, and a lot of it's the refugees. A lot of it is the predatory nature of the European Central Bank. And apparently Brexit is causing stress among the various member nations that want to break free from the European Union common to protect their own economies from a potential hard exit. So Brussels is trying to hold it all together while seizing more power. They're still trying to come up with a grand army of the European Union. They want to federalize the European Union, reducing the member states down to the level of a U.S. state, completely stripped of any power or sovereignty whatsoever. That could turn into a civil war as well. Now, the Hungarian government is really starting to stand up against globalism, the refugees, and George Soros. And now they're out there basically clashing with the EU over this issue that George Soros has apparently hired 2,000 people to meddle in the Hungarian elections. And the government spokesperson Zoltán Kovács warned that Soros is using his resources to meddle in the upcoming Hungarian parliamentary elections, which are scheduled for April 8. And he insists Soros wants to remove the ruling anti-immigrant Fidesz party and its satellite party, the Christian Democratic People's Party, who formed a coalition in 2014. Now, here's an interesting little story. Over at the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum in Poland, they have arrested a 19-year-old Israeli man who was caught urinating on a memorial to the victims of the camp. And the guards at the museum saw the man urinating on the monument near the crematoria in the Birkenau camp and called the police. The man was questioned for several hours before being released and agreeing to pay a $1,500 fine. He could have gotten far worse. Under Polish law, the man could have been given jail time for desecrating a monument or other public place commemorating a historic event. I am willing to bet a whole nickel that what he was peeing on was that plaque that had lowered the number of estimated victims. Several years ago, the plaque said 4 million people died here. And then when they got the Red Cross records and other documentation, they said, no, that's way overinflated. It was only 1.5 million. So they basically knocked off 2.5 million from the number and replaced the plaque. And of course, Israel doesn't like that because it undermines the 6 million mythology of World War I and World War II. Probably most of you don't realize they were using 6 million Jews as propaganda in World War I as well. Now, I'll bet you that's what the guy was desecrating. Now, apparently up in Sacramento, the U.S. military is simulating a nuclear truck bomb attack. It's a terror drill. And apparently this actually happened last Thursday, but it was a huge operation. The Governor's Office of Emergency Services, California National Guards, Homeland Response Force, the 95th Civil Support Team, along with FEMA, Urban Search and Rescue Forces, CAL FIRE, FBI, Department of Energy Radiation Assistance Team 7, and several other emergency response agencies for a terrorism and active shooting response exercise at Sleep Train Arena. So they're out there looking for the possibility that somebody is going to set off a nuclear bomb inside a truck. Is that going to be the false flag to launch the war against Iran or Russia or North Korea? Because they're not getting traction just with horror stories about sarin gas or Novichok. We've been lied to so much, and we hear the media complaining about how nobody believes them and trusts them anymore. Same thing with the government. I mean, the confidence in the government's at an all-time low. Trust in the government is at an all-time low. It really is. Yeah, if they're going to move the war forward, there has to be a new 9/11, possibly a virtual 9/11, or there has to be a chemical weapon attack, or even a low-yield nuclear weapon. And remember, they were talking just a couple of weeks ago about how some international player was thinking about setting off a low-yield nuclear weapon. Now, apparently, this is funny. This is actually funny. There was at Portland State, there was this get-together, and during the course of the discussion, somebody just happened to mention that, you know, men on average are taller than women. And apparently this liberal snowflake who dyed her hair green got all upset by that. You can't say that. That's unequal. I'm sorry, it's the reality. On average, men are taller than women. On average, men are stronger than women. That's the reality. And part of the problem we have with liberals is they get an idea into their head and they think that's the real world. And they get very upset with anybody who wants to challenge their fantasy, break their little bubble. It was actually quite funny to see. And she was removed from the meeting there. But again, does our Defense Department really think they're going to draft this kind of people and make an effective fighting force? Or are they only going to draft the children of conservatives? Story here where apparently 24 states are now pursuing free speech bills to protect conservative speakers from left-wing bullies and liberal authoritarians. The pushback is starting to happen. For months now, we've been seeing all these stories where conservative speakers invited to speak at a college and university, and the liberals just go, oh, can't do it, give me Play-Doh, give me bubble wrap, and they just go wacko bananas. And free speech means free speech. And the measure of your commitment to that First Amendment is if you support the right to freedom of speech of somebody who's saying something that you don't agree with. It's very easy to say, yeah, I believe in freedom of speech when the person speaking says things you like. There used to be an old saying, you know, I reject what you're saying, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. That's what we need to have here. And apparently, this just gets better and better. Natural news. Apparently, a pro-life group called Created Equal has acquired undercover video footage that appears to show an abortion clinic worker transporting dead babies in a passenger car and then transferring those dead bodies to a Stericycle waste truck for recycling and disposal. This is a gross violation of state law. I mean, aborted babies technically are medical waste, and there are strict rules on how you handle medical waste. You don't just throw them in a trash truck. All right, so let's get on back to that March for Our Lives, because there's a lot of people out there talking about this thing. First of all, they're estimating, at least according to CBS, 200,000 people attended the March for Our Lives gun control event in Washington, D.C. That's far short of the 500,000 the organizers of the event expected, and 600,000 less than initially reported by many news outlets. They were trying to basically inflate the numbers. It's almost 1 million people. It's almost 1 million people. That's how important this is. And like I said before, Adolf Hitler used youth marches to shape the opinion of the German people. That was the main function of the Hitler Youth Corps, was to go on out, march in demonstrations, carry placards and banners, and just keep drumming into the German people's heads the message of the rise of the Third Reich. By the way, a little side note telling you how much the liberals really do care about the environment. They apparently trashed the place. When it was all over, they literally left tons of trash for somebody else to clean up. It's funny, you can count on a liberal to scream about human-caused global warming, and, you know, we've got to preserve the environment, and we've got to save the polar bears and the rest of it. But when they're actually out there on the street doing what they're doing, they just drop their trash like, you know. And they expect somebody else is going to clean up the mess. And unfortunately, yes, somebody else did have to clean up the mess. CNN is out there wringing their hands and saying, we keep shouting about gun control, but no one cares. Wrong, CNN. We do care. We understand what the real agenda behind gun control is. The complete and total disarmament of the law-abiding American citizen to pave the way for an even more tyrannical government than we have now. Remember how George Bush used to joke, this would be easier if this was a dictatorship? That tells you that's what's going on inside their heads. Now, at the March for Life, kids are out there pushing this idea. We have a right to feel safe, and our right to feel safe trumps your right to own a gun. Well, there are two things wrong with that. First of all, I've read the Constitution. There's nothing in there about a right to feel safe. Feeling safe is a personal responsibility. And again, as Parkland demonstrated, you cannot count on the police to intervene when there's a shooting or somebody runs a red light and hits people on the pedestrian crosswalk, or takes a baseball bat and beats somebody to death over a girlfriend, which happened last week. The police aren't going to be there. If you want to feel safe, learn to handle a firearm safely and keep yourself safe. Now, the Washington Post is out there responding to gun owners or gun enthusiasts, basically trying to educate some of these gun grabbers about how guns really work. There's a lot of misconceptions out there. Remember that, I think this was about a year ago, somebody came on out declaring that it was possible to convert an airsoft gun into a real working .223 assault rifle. That's how ridiculous this is. And so gun owners and enthusiasts were trying to say, let me actually tell you how guns really work and dispel some of the mythology. And the Washington Post is now saying that gun enthusiasts are bullying anti-gun leftists. They're calling it gunsplaining. You shouldn't do that. Don't you dare try and educate the gun grabbers about how guns really work. That's a bad thing now, according to the Washington Compost. We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And during this march, March for Life, and if they want to march for life, why aren't they marching against abortion? But apparently one of the speakers basically got up there and said something that everybody needs to pay attention to. She said, when they give us that inch, talking about the bump stock ban, when they give us that inch, that bump stock ban, we will take a mile. In other words, the gun grabbers want to try and start a momentum. First, it'll be the bump stocks, which most people with sporting rifles aren't interested in anyway. Then it'll be something else. I mean, if you look at some of the ridiculous laws they have out there, limiting the number of rails you have on the foregrip, where people who are into sporting rifles, they like to put things like flashlights. They want to limit that. They want to take away the pistol grips. I mean, some of it is just downright silly. But again, notice the focus is always on the sporting rifles. The sporting rifles and the high-capacity magazines, because these are the weapons that in the hands of the American people can deter oppressive government. And that is the real reason for the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment wasn't about a right to own guns. Back when it was written, everybody had guns. People survived during the winter by hunting. They protected their homes with firearms. Having a gun was just an automatic thing. The Second Amendment was about reserving to the American people the means to hold off oppressive government. And there have been a couple of Supreme Court decisions that have reaffirmed that the Second Amendment guarantees to the American people the same weaponry that is in the hands of the uniformed services, in the hope that government will just decide to mind its own business. Because as I've said before, when you look at how abusive government is of us now, when we are all still armed, just imagine how much worse it's going to be when we're all helpless and unable to fight back. Now, Senator Marco Rubio is telling students he does not agree with the March for Our Lives. Rick Santorum is saying, don't march, learn CPR. Learn something useful. Apparently, Bataclan survivor Jesse Hughes slams David Hogue and other leftist operatives as pathetic and disgusting, vile abusers of the dead. I think that's pretty much accurate. That's what the gun grabbers do. They wave the bloody shirts to grab the guns, even if they have to make the bloody shirts, which seems to be happening. Now, interestingly enough, over in North Carolina, in Buncombe County, there is a Democratic candidate for sheriff who is actually campaigning on the idea of simply killing gun owners to confiscate their weapons. And he's trying to make it a joke, saying that, you know, people who say, you can have my gun when you pry it from my cold, dead hands, he said, fine, let's turn them into cold, dead hands. He's saying, okay, yeah. All right, we got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3 here. And this is a story that's just now breaking, coming out of the Columbian Post. It turns out David Hogue was not even at the Marjorie Douglas Stoneman High School during the actual shooting. And he basically, this was exposed in a CBS video documentary. And Hogue says he was at home and said that when he heard the shooting was happening, he grabbed his camera and headed to the school so he could get footage of the events to advance his aspiring future career in journalism. And so he wasn't even there. And the problem is this directly contradicts what Hogue told Time magazine, where he said he was in this environmental class. Let me see if I find it again. This just, yeah. Hogue claimed that he heard a pop while sitting in an AP environmental science class, and he told the teacher it sounded strangely like a gunshot. So we've got this guy just flat out lying. The whole thing is a cover-up. He wasn't a student at that high school. He graduated from Redondo Beach High School before his family moved to Florida. And like that other caller said, he doesn't look like he's a teenager. He looks like he's in his mid-20s. And he's been used before as a crisis actor out on the West Coast. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Mateus in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, I think you're being a bit too nitpicky about the little details here. I mean, just because he wasn't actually at the location shouldn't let that get in the way of a good false flag story.
Well, unfortunately, being picky is my job description.
And you're good at it.
Thank you.
So, okay, I've got my first good call to action idea here, and it is this. Okay, in many different countries, including Canada and the United States, we have this absurd situation where we have an open call for illegal voting. And Obama did it. He said, remember to vote early and vote often. Ha ha ha, just joking, don't vote too often. Ha ha ha. And then we've got Trudeau saying, just inviting the illegals in. And then now he just changed the voting law so you don't have to have ID to vote. And I know in the States you have the same problem going on right now where the illegals are being encouraged to vote. Okay, so here's the call to action. And what we do is all of us legal citizens, we contact our legal representatives and we just say that as long as this agenda stays on the books, and as long as you're promoting abuse of the voting system, we're all going to take advantage of it to illegally vote 20 times each to vote you out. And you don't even have to do it.
Well, that's one possible way, or what we can do is instead of demanding voter ID, just ask to see proof of age, because you have to be of a certain age to be allowed to vote. And so all they need to do at the polling places is say, show me some proof of your age. What are they going to show you? Their driver's license.
No, but they're not doing that.
No, they're not doing it. They're giving this country away. The liberals are giving this country away. They're allowing the illegal immigrants to vote themselves, our nation, in exchange for hanging on to power. And if Trump doesn't do something, like in the next 2 months, to stop this, to establish a national voter ID law, I can't understand why Congress and the White House are just not into solving this problem. And I understand that the liberals have come on, the Democrats...
We can solve it.
The Democrats have literally come on...
We can solve it ourselves. We can just go and vote 20 times each. Like on the next election day, you pack a lunch and you just start on one end of your city and go all the way across the city voting 20 times to get the person out of office that's promoting illegal voting.
Well, that won't work. That won't work. No, that won't work, unfortunately, because you have to vote in the precinct where you're registered to vote. You can't just walk into any poll.
No, but they don't know who you are because you don't need any ID. They don't know who you are. You just show up and I say, oh, hi, I'm an illegal immigrant and here I am to vote without my ID or whatever. And you vote. And then you walk down the street and you go to the next booth and you say, I don't have my ID. I'm here to vote. And you vote and you vote and you vote and vote and vote and vote. And you vote.
Maybe that's
all
going
of
to work.
Legal citizens.
Maybe that's going to work in Canada. But when you show up to vote, even though they don't demand to see your ID, you have to have a name. And they will cross it off the registry as a way of making sure that you're not going to vote more than one time. So it sounds like a nice idea.
Bob, Frank, you just change your name. They don't need ID. You can just say whatever name you want.
Yeah, but if you're not on if you're not on the voter roll, they won't let you vote. They won't give you a ballot. And what's going on here, the reason they load up the system is they're illegally registering illegal immigrants to vote. They're just handing out the IDs like up in Chicago, and they're allowed to register to vote, and then they go out and vote. And they're not supposed to vote. They're not citizens of this country. And the Democratic leadership has openly admitted they are depending on massive illegal immigrant voting to hang on to power.
Okay, well, let me ask you this question. How do you explain that person that was convicted for illegally voting like 6 times?
They caught one, you know, and there should be more enforcement.
But how did he vote
But the
6
way
times?
that you stop this is you bring back voter ID. And I
No, but how does he vote 6 times? How did he vote 6 times?
he may have had 6 fake IDs, 6 names provided to him by.
He has to be registered.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of
He has
false.
to be registered to vote 6 times.
Mateus, stop cutting me off. Okay, I'm trying to explain. We know that there's a big problem with fraudulent registrations. That came out in 2016 as well, where they were simply faking registrations and then they were handing the names and precincts to all these people, and then they were just bussing them around. The way that we solve this problem in the near term is bring back voter ID requirement. Show that you are a legal citizen of this country in order to be able to vote. This is so important. And in the long run, we have to get rid of those voting machines, those electronic voting machines. Now, if you go over to whatreallyhappened.com, go up at the top, right underneath my face, you will see an article, How to Have Honest Elections. And we wrote this and talked about it a while ago. And since then, I've had emails from other countries saying, yeah, what we have is very, very close to this, and this does work to keep the elections honest. So I would suggest that you take a look at that. But the inaction on Donald Trump's part is hard to fathom, because if he doesn't do something about the illegal immigrant vote, he's going to lose Congress this November, and he will be a one-term president.
Yeah, he may not be as smart as we thought he was. Here, one last question on a different topic. Why are we such a pathetic slave mentality race of human beings that allow all this corruption to go on for hundreds and hundreds of years?
Well, it's like boiling a frog slowly, which I don't really know if that works, and I'm not about to try. But we start out with our freedoms, and we lose a little bit of it, and we sort of get used to that. And then we lose a little more, we get used to that. Basically, we become complacent. As long as I have my job and my house and my family and everything, everything's okay. And we're not encouraged to get involved with what the politicians are up to. That was the message I got when I was in elementary school. Social studies was mostly about propagandizing us against the Soviet Union and how to be good members of our local community. But the idea that we would somehow become involved at the state or federal level, that was sort of left out.
Yeah, I'm getting really discouraged about being a human, really, really cynical and really discouraged. And it's actually turned into kind of a bit of a depression right now. It just seems like so absurd. We're so hopelessly a bunch of cattle. Nobody's standing up to this. We're all just letting it happen. It's just so pathetic.
I agree.
And it seems like there's so little that anybody can do about it.
Well, I'm doing all I can do about it, and it's cost Claire and I dearly, but we feel it's just completely necessary to go on with this and try and make a difference. And in one way, the independent media has made a difference because we have created a skeptical population, and that's a very healthy thing. We have taken away from government and the corporate media the ability to lie to the public with impunity. And that is, I think, a major victory.
Yeah, there is something to be said for being on the side of a more moral side of the situation, trying to do the right thing at least. And for all of your religious and spiritual audience, which is a lot, there's a certain satisfaction on that part of it. And then for just a non-spiritual or physical perspective, just on a morality perspective, there's a certain satisfaction doing the right thing. But we got to do more. Like, these humanzees they're talking about in the Drudge Report about some scientists saying we should mix human DNA with chimpanzees, some ridiculous thing. Well, yeah. I feel like it's already happened. I mean, I feel like that's where we're at right now. We're so conditioned, start doing your job, and half of us will just work that same job until we're dead, and without even thinking. We're almost just smart enough to fill out the paperwork and don't resist and just pay your taxes. It's like, man, we got to stop acting like humanzees here and start acting more like the forefathers of the United States. Come on, man. Myself included, I'm a big wussy here. I'm not standing up to anything either. But we gotta get it together somehow. It's not working right now. Like the criminals are 100% in charge of everything, and all the good guys, we've got our neck under a boot, and now we're getting physically raped all over the world, and not just financially.
I'll tell you what's going on here. As the American empire starts to fail, we're seeing planet Earth descend into a new dark ages, a new age of barbarism and savagery. We're losing our civilization. More than we're losing our country, we're losing our civilization. We're in a time of devolution. And the same thing happened after the fall of Rome. Rome, for all of its ills, was organizing the civilization and sort of kept things, running. And when Rome fell, the Dark Ages began. You had religious hysteria, the witch burnings, and so forth and so on. Anyway, listen, Matthias, I got to let you go. We've got callers waiting on the line here. Want to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And I just got an email saying that in Washington State, you may vote at any precinct, even unregistered. It's a special kind of ballot subject to checking with the Secretary of State later, but every precinct will let you vote without being on the list. Well, I'm sorry, that's unacceptable. Voting is the one place where you exert direct control over the fate of the nation. And it's just full of loopholes and rigging and those electronic machines. And if you have not been over there yet, you need to go visit blackboxvoting.org. It's run by this wonderful lady, Bev Harris, who was featured in the HBO documentary, Hacking Democracy. And if you have not seen that, you have to see that, especially the part at the end where they demonstrate how they could rig an election on an electronic voting machine without having to touch the voting machine itself. All right, we're going to go back to the phones. Mike in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, I voted for the Illinois governor and some other things. What was it, about 2 weeks ago? And I had these registrations for me, another guy, and another guy. There's three of us at the same address, and come in the mail, and it's got your name, and it's like a registration to vote, So I just took mine. It's a piece of paper with my name on there and my address, and I gave it to the guy, the judge, and he looks me up. He says, "Okay." I says, "How do you know that's me?" I said, "Because I got two more of these. I got two more people that live in my house. How do you know I'm not one of them?" Something like that. And he goes, "Oh, well, we look it up with your signature." I go, "Okay, all right, whatever." And then, so I guess if there's a question, because my signature doesn't look exactly like it should, then maybe he can ask me for a driver's license. But I was really surprised. I mean, he didn't even ask me for a driver's license, when I went to vote. And we did use the like you said, the electronic machines. I don't know how. I have to go and find out how to hack those. All I know how to do is set them up, start them up and stuff like that. Anyway, and I can't even think right now. I think they got hard drives. Yeah, they do. They got memory. They got memory sticks. They got USB memory sticks that they use to put the data on. Anyway, so it's crazy. I'm probably in agreement with you. I'd just like to make one more point about like shootings or whatever happens, whether it's psychological warfare. Anybody can pay somebody to do something psychological to get to implement, a particular policy that somebody's trying to put on the people in the form of a law. All right. I mean, You got these red light cameras that have no significance. I mean, are you serious? That's extortion. That is just bringing in money, $100 a pop, for somebody that didn't stop completely before they hung a right, or the light turned yellow and they went through the light and now they got a $100 ticket. It's just extortion. And they're looking for any kind of an excuse to implement their own policies and laws to to generate money or, you know, what have you. So I just thought that's the way I see the way things work, you know.
All right. Well, Mike, thanks for the information. We know Chicago's wide open. Rahm Emanuel is issuing ID cards to illegal immigrants, which will allow them to register and vote. I mean, they're just giving the country away. And it's our country. We, the people of the United States of America, and the legal immigrants built this place. And with this open borders and illegal immigrant voting, we've got this mass of people coming across the border who are going to vote themselves a chunk of our heritage. And it's wrong. It's flat out wrong. All right, back to the phones. Tony in Puerto Rico, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Tony?
Hello.
Yes, you're on the air.
Okay, I don't want to put you on the spot, Mike, but I am more confused than a cockroach in a hen house. I'm kind of proud that the founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence, they separated church and state, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I was watching a documentary yesterday called framingtheworld.com, where the Jewish Talmud considered Jesus Christ a bastard child, a criminal, son of a whore, the son of a centurion, and as a child, they sent him, and his mother sent him to Egypt. I mean, can you clear that up for me, please?
Well, I don't agree with calling him bastard and son of a whore. I'm familiar with the story of...
that's what it said in the Talmud. That's what it said in the Jewish Talmud.
Okay, hang on. Okay. I'm familiar with the story of Pantarius. That's the name of the centurion that supposedly knocked Mary up. And Joseph did the honorable thing, apparently, rather than let her get stoned for it. He said, we're going to get married, and the child is mine. And then later on, the whole idea about Son of God and everything came on up. But yeah, the Talmud says some very, very nasty things. And it's rather interesting for all the Christian Zionists that you need to read how the Talmud describes Jesus. Then you need to read how the Quran describes him, because the Quran is much more positive in their portrayal of Jesus. They see him as a prophet. They don't see him as a son of God, but they see him as a prophet and a good person. Okay?
Okay, thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks a lot. Boy, the phone lines are loading up. Let's go to Sherry in Texas. Aloha. Oh, wait, actually, Sherry, no, hang on. We're coming up on a commercial break, and I'm going to pick up your phone call as soon as we come back. Meanwhile, getting back to the shooting thing, apparently Pennsylvania is putting buckets of rocks in classrooms so the students can throw rocks at mass shooters. How's that for idiocy? We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go back to the phone lines, and the phone lines are really loaded up, we really do need your help at Republic Broadcasting and whatreallyhappened.com. We're having our advertisers threatened. You heard that in one of the other promos. It's getting serious out there. This is literally a war. And the only way we're going to get the big money influence out of media and government is for the little money to all unite together in the common cause of restoring the Republic. And if everybody listening to this show sent in just $5, it would have a tremendous, tremendous impact, because we know the audience is out there. We know you're out there. And we know that things are hard for you economically. So we're not asking for a lot. We're just asking for a little. And the postal address to send a check or money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. If you want to call on in and pledge to be a recurring subscriber, the phone number is 800-724-2719, extension 03. And folks, if we didn't need it, we would not be asking. All right, let's go back to the phone. Sherry in Texas, finally. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. Things are different now. They've become different all of a sudden, and our rights no longer count. It's as if a war has started now. This is what they planned, and this is what they've given us. But as far as I'm concerned, there is something good in here. Party politics is dead. I think. That two-headed snake where you switch heads, you know, you got the same snake, and people are aware of that now. You've got the same snake. And I think we're more united than ever because of that. Now, having different language, customs, and beliefs and all that is just not enough to separate us. Racism, as I've been seeing, it is promoted, encouraged by some, but because money talks, but not loud enough. We're still all human beings. Most of us see ourselves as children of one God. We're all together in our minds, basically, and we're ready for legislation now with the people's best interest in mind. It's not coming yet. Some like Trump, some don't like Trump, but we are a majority, more than we were before, ready to move forward. And here's the downside. Here's where we can get, since our routes don't count. You look at the Article 5, if on a local level we can be put in a position of public danger, they can deny us due process. So they're going to try to get as much public danger going as possible. And but
you're absolutely right.
it's
You're absolutely right. And one needs only go back and look at the history of the FBI's COINTELPRO operation in the 60s to see what they're going to do. They were encouraging racism. They were inciting racism. It's divide and conquer. The government wants the American people angry with each other. The last thing that they want, the thing they fear most, is the American people coming together as a single American people and basically correctly identifying the cause of all the decline of our nation, decline of our lifestyle, decline of our economy. And that's why they're out there fueling all of these groups like Black Lives Matter, which apparently is on a rampage out there on the West Coast someplace. They're trying to get that going as a distraction, keep us divided. The COINTELPRO went after not only the civil rights movement, they went after the anti-Vietnam protesters, they went after the early feminists, they went after the Native Americans. They like to play dirty. And in the wake of the scandal, Congress did pass laws saying the FBI couldn't do those things anymore, but unfortunately those laws were rescinded under the Clinton administration.
Yeah, they're going to keep trying. I just don't think it's going to be enough because, you know, the big push of corporate news and radio has been these dadgum liberals, and now they can't say that anymore. It's both sides. It's anything. It's a corporate run government. It's a corporate backed government. It's a corporate. The corporations are calling the shots, and the best we can do is just not try to create too much of a disturbance so we can go about our business. But to a certain extent, I think we're going to have to grin and bear it. I gave up my cell phone. I don't know if that's smart or not, because I'm at my age, I'm home more than I'm out and about. When I am out and about, I'm usually with someone who has a cell phone. But I felt really good about it because there were some restrictions there, and I thought, well, I just thumbed my nose at it and at them and said, I don't need you. And I think as much as that as we can do, and I just see that we are more united than we were before, because the party politics thing, from the public's point of view, is over. It's over.
Well, what the public is seeing, is the dirty politics and the faction fighting. And normally, this has always been going on, but it was kept out of sight because the government wanted to present this image of being unified and working together and not give the people cause to worry that the government was, in fact, falling apart. But that's now broken into the public view, and people are noticing it. I'm having a lot of people come up to me and talk about that stuff now. Anyway, Sherry, got to let you go. We got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Before we go back to the phone lines here, breaking story. Press TV is reporting that the U.S. Navy is now getting ready to arm the Virginia-class fast attack submarines with nuclear warheads. And apparently what they're talking about is a sub-launched cruise missile with a nuclear warhead. Now, the Virginia submarines can already fire Tomahawk missiles and torpedoes. There is a nuclear form of the Tomahawk. Maybe that's what they're talking about. But they're basically out there talking about increasing our deterrence. So this thing is really escalating and getting dangerously close to going real. All right, let's go back to the phones. Joe in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. Seems funny to arm anyone with nuclear warheads when the U.S. government sends the military to China and the military ends up in New Zealand or Australia, or they forget where they are. Just,
Well, there's a global black market in arms, and always has been. In fact, if you ever see the movie Charlie Wilson's War, which is a slightly romanticized version of how the Soviet Union was driven out of Afghanistan, there's a scene there in the middle where Charlie Wilson is over in Israel trying to buy captured Russian weapons from them to give to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan so that the U.S. has deniability that they're doing any of this stuff.
Yeah, my point was just nobody knows what the right hand don't know what the left hand's doing already, So just marching off to war and can't even find your ships to begin with just seems funny, but that's not why I called it. Just another funny story. This march to war at taxpayer-funded cost is just ludicrous. But the two things I wanted to talk about were, one of them was when Alexander Tytler analyzed usury and its connection to democracies and found out that every, I don't know if you'd call it society or, you could look, it's called the Tytler cycle, where they analyze, most societies last about 200 years, and then after they find out that the public can vote themselves the maximum amount of freebies and handouts from the government is the moment that that nation collapses.
Well, that's what happened to Rome.
And it's called the Tytler cycle, and, he looked at everything for, all the way back. The other thing I wanted to talk about is you mentioned Hacking Democracy as a good documentary.
Yes.
And I was wondering what your opinion of Hacking Democracy is compared to Invisible Ballots documentary that was done by G. Edward Griffin.
Well, they're both good documentaries. You should see. You don't have to make a choice. See them both. There's also a book out there called Vote Scam by the Collier brothers, and about half the book is available online to read for free. Obviously, they want you to buy the book so you can read the second half. But this was all going back when Janet Reno was Attorney General. And the Collier brothers grew wealthy with the Hawaiian Tropic line of tanning products. And one of them decided he wanted to get into politics and just discovered how dirty and how rigged the election process is. So they decided to write a book about it. And it should be required reading for anybody who's setting up any kind of an election system. Anyway, Joe, I'd
like to just say that software is that secret thing that's working against the American people in the background.
Yes.
And they're not fully aware of it. In both documentaries, Invisible Ballot as well as Hacking Democracy, it's software that works in favor of the corrupt to keep them in power, so to speak.
Absolutely, because you can't see the software. I mean, in the old days with the mechanical voting machines, they'd just shave the gears. But anybody looking into the back of the machine could see that that's what was going on. And it's rather ridiculous that all of these companies that make these machines are trying to say nobody can look at our software. I mean, if you go out to Las Vegas and you look at those slot machines, they're all run by computer now. And there's a very rigid process in place where authorities are looking at the software that goes into those machines to make sure they're not unduly cheating the gambling public. That's just entertainment. We should have the same thing for these election machines, but we don't. The companies claim it's all proprietary. And what is really proprietary about a piece of software that's supposed to just record the press of a button and tally a counter? Because that's really all a voting machine does.
Well, the Invisible Ballots documentary does address the people who headed the gaming control board or something, and they put software in to steal money. It was one of the things discussed in that documentary. But the other thing I wanted to say is Vince Foster.
Yep.
One of his final regrets in life, he says, "I wish I would have never told the Clintons about the secret backdoor and the promised software." And then shortly after that, he killed himself and flew to Geneva. And
No, he didn't. No, Joe. Thank you very much. Now we're going into Twilight Zone. Joe, okay, we're going to drop Joe, and we're going to go with Jerry in Chicago. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike, for taking my call. A real quick question. We all know that the Federal Reserve fiat currency monopoly money note is going to crash.
Yes.
My question to you is, in 3 weeks, I owe a fair amount of money to the IRS. Do you think I ought to just blow it off and let them catch me in the couple of years to come? Because I don't think it's going to last that long.
Well, that's obviously a decision you're going to have to make on your own, and I'm not going to offer an opinion one way or the other. You just need to understand the system is rigged. If you go back to Sullivan versus United States, Judge James C. Fox admits in the court record the 16th Amendment was never actually ratified. Then he goes on to say judges will always rule as if it were. So there you are. You're stuck. And the problem is the Internal Revenue Service likes to make examples out of tax protesters or even anybody that's wanting to say we need to be in compliance with the Constitution on this. There was that gentleman who wrote the book, The Law That Never Was. I forget his name off the top of my head. They really came down on him and forced him to take down his website. And now if you try and take that book into a tax court, they'll fine you just for having it. So again, given that the U.S. government isn't likely to last that much longer, I would say don't give them a reason to come after you. Because, again, down the road when the currency crashes, it's all going to be worthless anyway.
You're right. Okay, thanks a lot for your time, Mike. Have a great day.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to go to James in Ohio. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. One axiom of politics that is certainly in the top three is that if you simply react to things as they occur, the people who can use strategy are going to win every time. And a problem we have right now is Trump's divergence on various issues from what he said during his campaign. And the whole Trump thing is a cult of personality, which is fine. It's pragmatic. It works. But if he goes sour or he dies, then we're left without a unifying force for the right. And I also think we need to scramble. We need to be forward-thinking. We need to brainstorm about what can unify us for the next, not just the midterm elections, but the next presidential election.
Well, we're definitely going to have to do that. But I disagree with your assessment that Trump running the White House as a personality cult is okay. It absolutely is not. Personality cults get caught up in their belief systems. We saw that with Hillary Clinton and her followers who were just absolutely convinced that she was going to win. They're still fanatically entrenched in a lot of that liberal ideology. The problem that I'm seeing right now coming out of the White House is that Trump is now surrounded by a bunch of yes men regarding the war agenda.
Well, I don't mean that it's something to be sought after, but I do mean that it can work out more or less. But I think we also need to realize that we really miss an opportunity to reach out to the more reasonable part of the left when Bernie was, pardon the verb, screwed out of his nomination. And I think if we had reached out to the left at that point, that we would be in a much better position to attack the actual oligarchs rather than fighting each other tooth and nail. So, like Alexander Dugin, Putin's advisor, says, we need to look beyond left and right. People need to remember that capitalists created communism. If it wasn't for the big bankers, communism would have been, some dusty books that nobody ever read on a bottom library shelf. The books that outlined it. So capitalism, you have the problems with cronyism. People don't need to be multi-billionaires. Who needs $100 billion or $1 trillion? And things like that. We need to focus on constructing a new philosophy with things like one thing Islam does have right is that they do not lend money for interest.
Yes.
And if we're eclectic and we take the good ideas from everything and put it together, then we can attack the oligarchs, and not until then.
Well, that's why Israel.
By the way,
Hang on, I want to respond to what you said. That's why Israel and the private central bankers of the world hate the Muslim countries because they don't want bad ideas such as loan plus fee to get on out there, because they make their money by the compounding of interest. And they like that.
Right.
It's made these central bank owners so rich, we don't even know who most of them really are. And I'm like you. I'm not addicted to money, obviously. I'd like to have enough for Claire and I to be comfortable as we head into our elder years. But I don't need to live in a mansion. I don't need to drive an expensive supercar. But there are, unfortunately, people who are addicted to money and status. It is a drug. And we're seeing how these drug addicts, these money addicts, are devastating the world around them. But most people don't recognize that we're seeing a mental illness.
One last thing is that since the news has come out that David Hogg wasn't actually at the site of the massacre, that Hillary Clinton and Brian Williams have identified as Parkland survivors. So.
Okay.
But that's all I got for you. Well, keep up the good work, and everybody support what really happened in RBN.
Well, thank you for the kind words. We're rushing toward the end of the show. I don't know that I'm going to be able to get to all the callers, but we're going to give it our best try. Chuck in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Great show as always. I missed a little bit of the show because I'm working. I'm using my white privilege and working.
Okay.
But did you notice how the excitement and the absolute terror created when China said, we're not going to take your trash anymore?
Yeah.
We're going to restrict your garbage coming to our country. Their equivalent of the EPA said this is madness, taking in these all these tons and tons of trash, call it recyclables, if you will, with everything else that comes with them, into their country. Did they freak out over that? We can just treat you like, we can talk nasty about you, but if you don't take our trash, then you're some kind of subhuman animal, that you're not going to take America's garbage.
Well, we're running out of places to put it. And again, this gets back to that whole planned obsolescence where corporations are making things that wear out after a few years, and we throw the old ones in the landfill and we buy a new one, then we throw that in the landfill. It's amazing to see all these environmentalists who scream about global warming and the environment, and they don't talk about how the absence of products designed to last your lifetime, the impact that's having on the environment. And a lot of the stuff is toxic. It's not being processed. I can understand why China doesn't want it. They've got their own trash to dispose of. It's again, it's part of the escalation. We're heading toward a clash with Russia and China. In fact, basically, not Jeremy Corbyn, Galloway just came on out and said that the U.S. Kicking out the Russian diplomats is tantamount to an act of war.
Well, it's just amazing to me that something as simple as that, as blatant as, and all the side products coming out of these, quote, recyclables and the toxicity of them, and America, our American politicians are just freaking out because we can talk nasty about you, but you have to take our garbage. My friend, great show as always. You're the number one for news. Everybody, please support RBN. Even if you can only send $10, please do.
Well, thank you very much for that. All right, we're going to take one more phone call. We're heading to the close of the show. Dennis in, I guess, in Indiana. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. But I was thinking, I don't know, I don't wish for anywhere to start. But as far as these the DACA and illegal immigrants that are here, the way they say that they just love our country and this and that, and I'm not against them personally, but Donald Trump, I don't know if he has, was a chief executive officer or not, can give an order, because I don't wish this any war to happen to us, but maybe they ought to be, like, you know, if the draft does come back or something, that if a war does start, that they ought to have to maybe be going into the military and fight for our nation, fight for our country and our freedoms and our constitutional rights. Then they might understand, and then and that way they can work towards getting legalized citizenship or naturalization in our country, and their dues would be paid that way.
There's already a program doing that. Army recruiters are down in the areas with the illegal immigrants, and they're saying, if you will sign up for the military and serve X number of however it's going to be, at the end of it, you will get a green card. The problem that I have with that is these are people who don't have a love of this country. They don't identify with this country. And so they're not going to be a motivated fighting force going into the war zone. They're probably just going to hunker down in the foxholes and just wait out their time and then come on back and be citizens. So again, I know our military is counting on the high technology wonder weapons, but that was the strategic mistake the Nazis made as well. Dennis, I got to let you go. We got to do our final commercial break, and we're going to close the phone lines because I got a few more things I want to share with you before the end of the program. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today, and we fell way behind on the talking points because of all the phone calls, which we enjoy the phone calls. So I'm going to be taking a lot of the stuff into tomorrow's program here. We're still talking about this March for Life. And apparently, one high school down in Florida has decided that students must wear clear backpacks and ID badges. And, of course, David Hogue is out there saying, no clear backpacks. It's embarrassing. Well, it all depends on what you've got in there. But the idea is to not have students have a handgun inside their backpack. And to me, that makes a little bit of sense. But David Hogue is against that. Remember, everything that's been suggested, arming the teachers, clear backpacks, all of it is rejected by the gun grabbers. They want to stay focused on one and only solution to their problem, and that is to confiscate all the guns. And I agree with the caller earlier. They're really trying hard this time. And they're not really getting any traction with the American public because the American public understands this is not about gun control, it's about people control. Apparently, David Hogue, a while back, just went on this profanity-laced rant against the NRA. And when they start resorting to that kind of tactics, I think they're losing the debate. They're losing the public debate. Now, over at Dick's Sporting Goods, they have suffered a major backlash following their gun ban. And shares of stock in Dick's, which had risen by as much as 13% this year, dropped by 7.3% in recent post-report tracking. And apparently the latest quarterly report is showing profits and sales falling far short of expectations. People are simply going someplace else where they can buy what they want. Now, Ben Swan has a new video out. We've linked it to the front of whatreallyhappened.com. Reality check, the true meaning of the Second Amendment. And it basically goes into what I was saying earlier in the show. It's not about owning guns. When the Second Amendment was written, everybody owned guns. It was necessary. Everybody hunted during the winter, and you target shot to keep your proficiency up. The Second Amendment is about arming the American people to withstand government oppression, because the Founding Fathers understood the problem with political power is it always attracts the very sort of people who should not be allowed to have it. Hillary Clinton being a good example of that. So this issue is going to continue, and I sadly fear that if they don't make any progress with their gun confiscation plan this time, that once again we'll see men in dark suits with body armor and high-powered weapons crash into another school. And some drugged-up patsy taking the headlines. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got to do the Jim Goddard show up there in Vancouver. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. Please take everything that you learn here and email it to your friends. Talk about it with everybody that you know. Bypass the social media because now they're filtering everything, trying to keep a lid on the public's growing awareness of just how bad things are. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.